Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of ChatJSB. I'm Chris Shepard, the artistic director of the Complete Bach, and I'm so excited today to welcome Simone Dinnerstein. But to our audiences in Worcester, she really needs no introduction. Simone, I'm thinking you and I first met because we did the Beethoven choral fantasy together, and that's got to be at least 10 years. And I know that you've been an artist in residence, and we've brought you up so many times. You are one of our very favorites. So it almost seems silly for me to introduce you to everybody in Worcester, but welcome back.
Thank you so much. Worcester is a very, very special place for me. After Brooklyn, my second favorite place.
And it's okay for Brooklyn to be cooler than Worcester, although these days Worcester's getting so hip that who knows, we
Yeah.
might be the new Dumbo. Um, Simona is the star of this year's BACHtoberfest. We are featuring her in two concerts, one with Baroklyn and my choir, CONCORA from Hartford. And more about this later, but Simona will be making her conducting debut, and that's incredibly exciting. So a little bit more about that later. But then you with Alexis Gerlach are going to do the viola da gamba sonatas, though on cello, and you are going to play the 2 and 3 part inventions on Saturday night. So we'll touch on all of this. But what I wanted to start with, because you have one of those mythological stories where your career got turbo boosted because of a piece by Bach. And I wonder if you could say something about your relationship with the Goldberg variations. And I'm only going to say one more thing and then let you loose. And that is this. I don't know if I've told you this, Simona. The first time I heard your recording of the Goldberg variations, and I've conducted a bit of Bach over the years, I had this crisis of confidence because I thought, I don't know anything about Bach. You found little lines inside these pieces that I never dreamt of hearing. And I just have to say that for those of us who love Bach, your interpretation of the Goldbergs is just mind-blowing. So it's not surprising that your career exploded because of this work. So why don't you tell our viewers about it?
Thank you so much, Chris. That means so much coming from you. I just have the greatest respect and admiration for you as a musician and as a Bach scholar. So that's really, it really means a lot to me. Um, yes, I did have a crazy moment with the Goldberg variations, which has been a very important part of my life, actually my whole life, really. Um, well, in a nutshell, I decided to learn the piece when I was pregnant with my son, which was 24 years ago. I had never thought I'd be ready to play it, but I thought I'm about to become a mom. I ought to be ready to play the Goldberg variations too. So for me, the Goldbergs, learning to play them, making them part of myself is inextricably linked to my son and to that act of creating a person. So it's very special for me. And in fact, he was born to a recording of the Goldberg Variations, the one that Rosalind Turek did in William Buckley's house.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so he has a lot of memories of the Goldbergs that it might be subconscious too.
In utero memories.
Yes, yes. And crashing into the world to variation 21, I believe. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, I decided to learn the piece and I spent quite a few years really working on it and performing it. And then I decided to record it in 2005. And at that time, it was before people did crowdsource funding. And so I had a few sponsors who helped me with it. At that point, I didn't have a manager, I didn't have a record label, and I didn't have any money. And so there were a lot of obstacles to overcome. And
And you had an infant who
I
needed a
had
lot
a
of
little boy.
attention.
Yeah. And so these few friends who were able to support me supported me on this project. And I wound up shopping around the recording to a few different people and music industry people. I had a debut recital at Weil Recital Hall, which was also paid for by another sponsor. And at that recital, all of these people in the music industry came. I mean, it was really one of those things you read about where there's like one concert that everything hinges upon. And, I don't think that that happens all that often, especially to people who haven't won a competition. I mean, and also I was in my 30s already, so that was old for the classical music industry. I had essentially been a freelance pianist living in Brooklyn before then, teaching local kids and doing little recitals and concertos wherever I could.
Yeah.
And all these people came, and that concert received a really wonderful. I played the Goldberg Variations. I had a really wonderful review in the New York Times, and the Philadelphia Inquirer came. And it was a really big thing, and it led to me being taken on by Columbia Artists Management. And I met my manager, Tanya Dorn, who wound up being the woman who really helped create my career, and my publicist, Christina Jensen, who was just starting to be a publicist then as a freelancer. She promoted that concert. So everything kind of started there. And 2 years later, at 2007, Telarc licensed the recording and released it. And because of this kind of buzz that was generated through all of that and through a big article in Slate, which was a very
Oh,
important
right.
online magazine then, and there was a big profile that Anne Majette wrote about me in the New York Times that was released on the day of release of the recording. So it was Slate and the New York Times. The recording went to the number one on the Billboard classical chart that first week when it
Oh
came
my
out.
God. Oh, I didn't know that part. That's
Yeah, it
insane.
was really crazy. And the other thing that happened was the day that it came out, I was on John Schaefer's sound check on WNYC. And in fact, I had been teaching John's daughter because he lives in my neighborhood. So his 10-year-old daughter was my student. He knew me as his daughter's piano teacher, but he presented me on the show the day that it came out. And while we were on the show, he was looking at the Amazon charts, which were a big deal then because it was still CDs.
Yeah.
And, and while I was performing on the show, he said, "Oh my gosh, you're higher than the White Stripes," which was like this big band. And like I got to like, I don't know, number two on all music and Amazon. I mean, it was a really
All music.
insane
Oh my
moment.
God.
Yeah, it was insane.
Simona,
So
that story is even crazier than I knew. That feels like that just couldn't happen again. That the media landscape, even in those 20 years, has splintered so much. That is really just incredible. And so did all the dates pour in after that?
yeah, they started to, and it was actually it was quite a transition because I suddenly had an international career. And not only that, everybody seemed to know this recording. And so I started to have this issue where I was like having to live up to my own recording
Yeah.
performance. And that's hard. So it was a very exciting time. I would say like the sort of 10 years following 2007, the release of the recording were like a whirlwind. I can barely remember
Yeah.
what was going on then. I mean, it was really
Were you
crazy.
like a rock star who everybody wants to hear the early hits? Like, was it Goldberg's 24/7, or were you able quickly to pivot to Concerti and like Philip Glass and your other repertoire?
There were a lot of Goldbergs
Yeah.
and there was a lot of requests for Bach. And of course, I had to keep recording. And actually, since then, I think it's averaged out to one recording a year, which is quite a lot.
That's a lot.
I think I've done I just released my 15th recording.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
I'm curious,
So,
what were your other Bach works in your repertoire from the beginning, other than the Goldbergs?
um, well, I mean, I've never been a completist. I don't have a very big repertoire, in my opinion, and certainly not compared to Bach pianists. Like if I think about somebody like Andras Schiff or Angela Hewitt, I'm nowhere near that kind of comprehensive understanding of all the repertoire. I just have never done that, and I learn very slowly. And I like to stay with the same repertoire for a long time. I mean, I guess I'm that type of a person, like I've been with my husband since I was 15. You know, I've lived in Brooklyn my whole life. I guess I'm not that adventurous. But I
Oh,
like to,
but the industry needs both types, right?
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that in the end, it doesn't really matter if you, and as long as you're really giving your best to and bringing something that's deeply thoughtful. Some people are able to do that with vast amounts of repertoire, and other people do it with small amounts of repertoire. And like I absolutely love Vermeer, and there are very few paintings by him, but there are a ton of Rembrandts. And it doesn't mean that Rembrandt was better than Vermeer. They both were amazing, but they had a very different output. So not to compare myself to Vermeer, but I'm just saying that, it's like I'm just more selective and slow. So I started doing I would do a program with different suites, or I started performing the D minor Bach keyboard concerto a lot. And then I gradually started adding on more and more keyboard concertos. It's always for me been a challenge to have time to learn new repertoire while touring and performing. And in those first few years, especially because I also had a young child, I found all of that really hard to balance. And I would say that since about 2016, 17, I've started to do much more, in my opinion, many more interesting projects, and kind of got away from just doing recitals and concertos, and I formed my own ensemble. I started to do commissioning. I met Philip Glass. I've just started to do things that I find more artistically unusual, and I really like that. And it does mean that I do less of the recital concertos, but it also means that I feel like I'm expanding as a musician.
That is the perfect. Every musician is good at segues, right? And that is the perfect segue to Baroklyn. Just a little background for the people watching this. This is this incredible newish now ensemble, mostly strings, a couple woodwinds, with you at the piano. And my introduction to you guys was I couldn't go to your concert, so you kindly let me stop by the Miller Theater at Columbia to hear a dress rehearsal. And it hadn't occurred to me that because you're a pianist, you would be leading this small ensemble in a cantata from the piano, not from the harpsichord, not from the organ. And it took me, I was sitting up in the balcony, and it took me about 30 seconds just to reorient my ears to it. And then I was just blown away by it. And I was so struck because, for the longest time, great musicians like Mendelssohn and Schumann, they would realize these continuo parts for the piano. And you move forward to people like Reger. Then you think about people like Shostakovich, who wrote pieces based on Bach for the piano. And somehow, Simone, you made it feel really idiomatic. And yet, the same way that you're doing what you did with the Goldbergs and taking the risk of recording, taking the risk of playing at Weil, you really took a wonderful artistic risk with this project. So tell us about it.
Well, yes, I feel that I've never been that interested in being sort of historically correct. That's kind of not been my guiding light with Bach or with any composer, really. I'm much more interested in what I regard as the music itself, which is, what do I see in the score that I find so fascinating and odd and compelling? And I love the piano. I love the sonority of the piano. And so for me, it's done through the piano. And uh, so I had thought about the cantatas in particular. I was like, at first I thought, should I be having a harpsichordist play this? And then I thought, no, I like the piano and I think it'll work. And so I talked to my good friend, Philip Lasser, who is a fabulous composer who I have, he's written a piano concerto for me. He's written various pieces of music for me. And I first recorded his variations on a Bach chorale, 12 variations on a Bach chorale, which is a gorgeous piece. Um, and so I talked to him because he has a very, very special connection to Bach, which is kind of a little eerie in my opinion. It's almost like he's talking to Bach from now. And and he said he would be able to write a new kind of continuo part for me for the piano. And so I believe that the one that you saw was the Cantata 54, which we were doing, which is with countertenor.
Yeah.
And
And
he
not just any countertenor.
No, that is definitely true. That was with Reggie Mobley, who's amazing. And he was very willing to do this kind of unusual reimagining of the cantata with a it's the continuo part on the piano is actually like a new part. It's like a new line or
Yeah.
two new lines. Well, actually, the left hand is outlining the continuo part, but he even that Philip adds a few things. So it's sort of like almost like a new voice that's within Bach's context. Not that Philip is not using the harmonic outline that Bach wanted, but he's bringing it into his own idiom, Philip's own idiom. And so I just thought it was so amazing to hear this. And I've even done it with continua parts that Philip did not write, where I just kind of rearrange things and reimagine registers where I might play on the piano. And then also, I've even gone so far as to rearrange the string parts so that the string players in Baroklyn are trading off lines that are not written to be done that way. Because even in Bach's own writing, he can write, say the violin one part, the first violin part, might have multiple lines within it, which that violinist is supposed, I think is supposed to show that there's this, it's not one voice, it's actually two voices or sometimes three voices. And so sometimes I divide the lines between different players so that you can hear even better, oh, this is actually a dialogue, even though it's one line. Um, I feel like I've veered off of your question
No,
now.
no, no, it's fantastic. And I have to, as you're talking, I have to say, as somebody who loves Bach and I'm not a purist. Um, when I hear, particularly the recording that you guys have just made, Complicité, which everybody who's watching this needs to go and download. Um, I felt the same way that I did about hearing your Goldbergs for the first time, which is that it's the illumination of small gestures that you're like, oh, of course that's what Bach was thinking. Or you could even say, of course that is what Bach might have been thinking. Like we don't need to
Don't
be
need to.
absolutist about this. But that's what's so amazing. And that what Philip does is that he just sort of, you get this glint of light on a little gesture that is it's just so illuminating. He's quite a genius, I think.
He really is. And actually, for the concerts coming up, he's written as you know, because you commissioned him, continuo parts for the cantata BWV 9. And oh my gosh, I am so excited about them.
I can't wait to hear the
Mean,
first version.
there's one that I was listening to it. Oh my gosh, this sounds like Foray, and he's like, yes, this is in Paradisum, basically from the Requiem. He's taken that kind of organ line, and it's very inspired by that, and I'm just so excited. Like I'm trying to imagine what it's going to sound like with the singers and the oboe and the flute, and I think it's going to be just revelatory. It's totally different. It requires a completely different tempo. Um, and um, and that I find unusual because, this is another thing that I discovered when I was learning the Goldberg variations is that I don't know why, but we tend to copy each other in our interpretations. And it's so interesting as more and more audio, recordings have become available to us. Like now we can listen to anything online. It's amazing. And I find it fascinating when I listen to different recordings how similar the tempi are between different recordings. And sometimes you can get something different if you go back to like the 1950s, because in that time, the 1940s, 1950s, even the 1930s, if you can get that far, uh, they took slower tempi. A lot of them did. Maybe because they were using greater forces, especially in a cantata situation. But generally speaking, for some reason, people tend to fall into very similar tempi. And I'm not sure why that is. And I don't think that the music is saying that. I don't think the music, even when the composer writes metronome marking, which Bach never did, but um, if you even look at that, there's no real reason why everybody should take the same tempo.
Well, I think that the reason, and anybody who's listened to me talk, because I talk about this a lot because it was my PhD thesis, and it's funny, you and I are broadly in the same generation, and we grew up under the orthodoxy of the period instrument movement. And so, that brought so much understanding to what Bach should sound like. But what it didn't do was allow for individuality.
Mm,
And there's now this thawing. It's what allows you, had you produced this album 30 years ago, you probably would have been scolded for using piano for some of the choices of tempi and things like that, because people were so afraid to get off that quite narrow path that had been set by the period instruments. And we're now
yes,
in this period where it's possible for a great Bach mind to say, well, actually, let's just rethink it. And you hear new things, don't you, Simona,
yes, you
when you
definitely do.
challenge it.
Definitely. And also, I would say I still have some resistance from listeners. I mean, I think that there are people that are deeply offended by what I do, but I'm sorry that that's the case.
Ah,
But I think that
how do you feel about that? Is that stressful for you, or you're just like, well, this is just what I'm doing. This is my authenticity.
um, I feel very, very sensitive on Philip Lasser's behalf. Like, I don't like it when people belittle him. I don't like that at all. I think it's really disrespectful because he's so brilliant. And everything he's doing comes from deep understanding and thought, not any kind of lack of understanding or lack of respect for Bach. So I hate it when people say anything that implies those things. And I get annoyed when people imply that about me too, because I think that I really have thought about this quite carefully. But basically, I feel sad for people that can't be open to hearing something different and potentially really beautiful and meaningful. Like I just feel like it's not you're not open to beauty then. And that's pretty sad for those people.
Well,
So
and that was what happened to me sitting up there in the balcony at Miller, is that I gave myself over to it because of my respect for you. And I have to say, and I'm not somebody who tears up to music all that often. I was just overwhelmed by the beauty. It was just beautiful. And but you have to, in a way, you have to have the humility to say, somebody could have something to say to me about this music that is totally different than I've ever heard it before.
yes, that's true. And that's, yeah, I agree. And I have to say that there are historical performances that do that to me. Like recently, I've been listening to a lot of Rachel Podger's recordings,
Oh, yeah.
and I just think she is amazing and just so I'm so moved by her playing. And, her choices are different than what I would do. But I absolutely love what she does, So doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone, but you can still be open to an experience that is amazing. And I think that the recording that really um unlocked a lot for me with the Goldberg variations was a recording by the jazz pianist Jacques Lussier.
Oh, right.
Yes, and he recorded the Goldbergs with his trio. And when I heard that recording, that's what made me, that like flipped a switch in my brain. And I was like, oh, you mean that can happen? And and when I and it just felt like it was almost like it gave me this permission to just completely breathe the music in a different way. So
And
yeah,
how lucky are we to have a composer? Because the truth is, both you and I have done a lot of music by a lot of different composers. You can count on one hand the number of composers that can be taken in so many directions and still work. And that is, so why would you deprive that extraordinary aspect of Bach's music by saying, but we have to be on this orthodox path?
right. I mean, actually, more recently, I did that with Charles Ives,
Oh,
and now he has like a ton of directions
yeah.
in his music. I was playing the Concord Sonata, and and there are so many directions. It's like thickly black in the music with everything. And I actually erased all of his directions. And the miracle of the iPad, I whited them all out. Now, some people would be very angry about that, but I thought that his directions were obscuring what he wrote to me. And and it made me think about the music in an entirely different way. And, my dream has been, and I don't know if I'll ever have the guts to do this, but my dream is to do that to the Beethoven sonatas, to create an edition of Beethoven sonatas that takes out all of his markings. Because I just think we are so limited by these markings. And Bach didn't use those in his music. And we don't say, I mean, of course, people that study his music for performance practice during his time have various theories about what a slur might mean or what a tempo would be because of the time signature or the different types of rhythmic notes in it, or if it's chromatic or not. There are all sorts of theories about it which change generation to generation.
And
And
contradict one another all the time.
right. Yeah. And yet we don't really authoritatively have him writing down in the music, this is a mezzo forte now, put a sforzato over here and the staccato here. And because of that, we are able to really see so many possibilities in the music, which are probably beyond the possibilities that he imagined. I mean, in any case, they are because we're playing them on completely different instruments in a time that he could never possibly have imagined that his music would be played in, I mean, he would be so bewildered by our world, and so I think it would be brilliant to do this with the Beethoven sonatas because so many people feel that they have to follow this set of directions, which are not always really that intuitive or yeah, it can often sound like people are following directions. And I
And
think
then
that
when you hear the those really famous Roger Norrington recordings where he literally absolutely everything, including metronome markings, and some of them are just not at all musically convincing, even.
mm, well, I mean, they're just, there are just so many ways to play those sonatas, and I think it would be a fascinating experiment to do what I did with the Ives and just erase them.
I just love how angry that you're going to make people. Now, speaking of making decisions, you are in the process of doing that thing that people like me absolutely dread, is when absolute A-list usually instrumentalists or sometimes singers decide that now it's time to dip their toe into conducting. So people like me who have eked out a meager living now have to compete with people like you. So I'm so excited about this, Simona, and I'm so excited first in Hartford at the Garmony concert series with CONCORA on the Thursday night, the 23rd of October, and then really as part of the Complete Bach Friday night, the 24th of October in Worcester, beautiful Mechanics Hall. There you're going to be standing up, waving your arms. How do you feel about it?
I'm really excited and really terrified. And you have been my biggest champion.
Yeah, I think
I'll
it's
never
amazing.
compete with you. Um,
I can't wait to hear how you feel about what it's like because it's such a different, I mean, literally physically, it's such a different experience to have your hands not making sound themselves, but creating sound. It's just such a wild thing and such great performers. Your Baroklyn who know exactly what you want, and then
yes.
my Concours who are wonderful and so excited to be working with you.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about working with CONCORA because I mean, choirs are the voice and choirs are like my favorite of anything. Like the music that I listen to, that's what I listen to.
Oh,
And yeah, I just love the voice. And so I am very excited to hear how that's going to be. I think that my biggest obstacle really is to feel confident enough that I can ask people to do stuff that I want them to do. That's the biggest thing. And I've been working on that with Baroklyn. I mean, I formed Baroklyn in 2017. And over the years, I remember in the beginning, I felt really embarrassed to ask them to do anything. And then over the years, I've gained confidence. And a lot of that is because the musicians themselves have been so supportive. I mean, Rebecca Fisher, who's the concertmaster, who's been my good friend since we were Tanglewood Fellows 25 years ago, or whatever it was. She is so encouraging to me. Like I really feel that she wants me to speak up and to say and to direct, And we had a concert last May, which was our first non-Bach concert. All of our concerts have been Bach,
oh, I didn't
with
know that you did a non-Bach concert.
yeah, we did all Philip Glass.
Oh, wow.
And it was our first time doing a different composer. And that was a great experience because there are so many parallels in terms of interpretation, in terms of how to interpret Glass's music. His music is very similar to Bach in that the scores are empty of many markings and it's very contrapuntal. So you really have to think about how are you going to make these different lines. And but what's different about playing Glass and playing Bach is that there are many times when the piano is not playing. In Bach, the piano is always playing. And so I can't really wave my arms around while I'm playing. But with the Glass, there were a lot of opportunities where I actually had to conduct. I was sitting, but I had to conduct. And um, And I was at first ashamed to do that with them. And then they were like, no, please do. And I was doing it. And then like 5 minutes before the concert, I called Becca into my dressing room and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I think you better lead tonight. And she was like, well, I could do that, but I really think that you're going to be able to do this, Simona. And so I was like, really? And she's like, yes, I think you can. And so we went out on the stage and I remember that I closed my eyes and started conducting because I couldn't even look at them. And And then they were doing what I wanted them to do. And it was so amazing that the whole concert was just like this, like organic experience. And it was very, very exciting. So I feel very encouraged from that experience.
And you
But
were, and you had the piano to hide behind in that.
I did.
It was a nice way station
It was.
because you feel safe in that in
I
that.
did. Oh, I did have to like, lift my arm up and really show them what I was, that was different. It was a like a halfway house. And then as you know, Chris, because you helped me prepare for this, I had this fantastic experience conducting the Special Music School in New York, their high school pianists and orchestra
How
in the
amazing for those kids. Oh my
yeah,
Lord.
we did this Bach concert with all the different keyboard concertos from multiple keyboards, and there I was standing and conducting, and I'm so grateful that I had that experience doing that before what's coming up.
As you will discover, I mean, the funny thing is, kids are way harder to conduct than pros. We're more scared of working with pros because, like you say, there's always this sense of, well, who am I? I mean, even at your level, who am I to tell somebody who's at the top of their field what to do with their instrument? But that is the definition of conducting. I mean, at some point, you have to be the one with the idea, and then they
Yes.
bring their own ideas that improves yours. I think it's great. I think
Yeah.
everybody who watches this is going to want to come along and see you in your new element. And then I just wanted to do one last thing for the weekend, which is to ask you about, so many of us as younger pianists learned the two-part inventions, although there are also much harder three-in-part inventions, which are sometimes called symphonias. Can you talk a little bit about your choice to perform these, what are thought of as student works, but of course are anything but when you actually play them as a set? What's your relationship to these works?
Well, the two-part inventions were they were probably the first Bach pieces that I studied, those in the little preludes. And I think they're so difficult. I also taught them for many years when I was teaching all of the different neighborhood kids, and they are very hard to teach.
Oh.
Um, and I think that they are just really remarkable pieces of music. The three-part inventions, the sinfonias, are really hard. In fact, some of them are, I think, harder than some of the fugues from the preludes and fugues. But they are just all I guess 30 of them, 15 inventions, 15 symphonias. They're like Bach in a nutshell. I mean, each one he goes through the different keys, and they all have the feeling of the keys. So like the F minor ones, they relate to other works in F minor that Bach has written. The G major is the same. Like there's certain characteristics of keys that you will find in these pieces. There's also rhythmic elements, like ones that feel like dances, ones that feel more lyrical. There's the way that the chromaticism works in them, the the kind of overlapping of lines. He wrote in his introduction to them that they were pieces not only to teach how to write for these two voices or three voices, but they were pieces that he composed to teach how to play them and how to play them in a cantabile style, which is a lyrical style, which I think is a really interesting thing that he included that in his introduction, that it was cantabile.
And what was the first thing that the HIP movement got rid of was legato. I'm constantly saying to
Yeah.
my choirs and orchestras they had invented legato by the Baroque period.
Right, right.
And it's one of the few things that he did not leave treatises for us to read, and I find that really really interesting that he leaned into that style.
Yes, definitely. So it's also, those pieces are, as a student and now as an adult and somebody who plays Bach a lot, they're a reminder of how you have to think about these different voices as having independent characters. And there are many questions about how to do that and how to do it in such a way that the listener can hear the two different voices or the three different voices. Um, for instance, we have a tendency to have imitative voices have the same phrasing or the same articulation. I think that that can sometimes hinder us from hearing that they are two different voices.
Uh,
So sometimes I find it's more interesting and it's more it pops out in your ear more if they don't have the same intention, and so how do you do that? What are the choices that you make? And there are all different ways you can do that. So it's highly imaginative working on these pieces. And the other thing that I think about with Bach, and I've been thinking about that a lot with the cantatas, because now that I've been studying, like, for instance, the first movement of the cantata number 9, which I'll be conducting, which is with strings, oboe, flute, and then the choir with their four voices. It's a lot of different voices going on at the same time. And though I listen to a lot of vocal music, I do not speak German except in the most terrible fashion. And so I never listen for the words. And frankly, I've never been interested in the text because I'm not a religious person, and I find Bach's religious texts a little heavy-handed for me. I'm sorry to say. I'm not really that I'm not
17th and 18th century Lutheran theology is not exactly light and fluffy.
it's not really, it doesn't really deeply interest me. I mean, some of the sentiments in it I can relate to just as a feeling, but in terms of the theology, I don't really find that that's not what's motivating me to listen to the cantatas, right? So I have been, of course, reading the text, so I understand what the text is. And one of the things that struck me, which is of course so obvious to anybody who's thought about this at all, is that when you have four different voices singing text and they're doing different things the way Bach does, they're singing different words at the same time. And so somebody listening to it who could understand the German would not be able to understand it anyway, because it's a total cacophony of words. Like they're not singing the same words at the same time. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, what is the point of them using words if you can't hear the words, if you can't decipher the words, right? And I'd be curious to talk to you about that. But I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking what I think it is that those words mean something to the people singing them. And so, the alto singing their part are getting meaning from their part and from the words that they're singing. But the people listening, the congregation, they're not going to get that same meaning because they're not going to be able to hear those words. And I feel that that really accentuates something that I already thought about with his music, which is that he's not writing the music for the listeners. I
Mm.
feel like he's writing the music for his relationship with music and with religion, I guess, or spirituality. And he's writing the music for the people that are playing it and their relationship with playing it or singing it. And so, like in the two-part inventions, for instance, I don't think he cared at all about the people listening to it because I don't think he thought about performance. I think he thought about that person sitting at the keyboard. What meaning are they going to get from those two voices?
God, that just made you just blew my mind again because of course coming to choral music entirely fresh, that never even occurred to me. But of course, you actually just encapsulated the core nature of vocal polyphony, which is that it will always be textually cacophonous, but it just never, technically, we just talk about using more diction to get clarity and this and that. But I love that. And of course, Bach's music is almost fundamentally participatory, isn't it? Like it's awesome to listen to. But for those of us who get to do it from the inside, that is a just fundamentally different experience to be inside the music of Bach. Ooh, wow. This makes me even more excited. I can't wait. We have our first rehearsal with Simona next week or in 2 weekends, and I can't wait to put it together. I could talk to you all day, but these kind people who are watching us have other things to do with their
Yeah.
lives. So why don't we stop it there? Come to if you're in Connecticut, come to see at the Hart School of Music the Garmony concert series Thursday night, the 23rd of October, or even a much bigger scale, come to Mechanics Hall in Worcester for BACHtoberfest, our second BACHtoberfest weekend in the second year of the complete Bach, and see Simona in many different guises with many different friends, old and new, making music with her. It's just lovely talking to you today, Simona, and thank you for letting us see your dad's awesome painting behind you. And
Thank you,
for
Chris.
everybody, we will see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you either in Hartford or in Worcester. Thank you.
See you then.